Hello there, sword fans. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. It is a Kingston Arms Type 18 single-handed arming sword of the Atrim design. It's a pretty long-winded name, and I'll try to decompress what some of that stuff means a little bit later. But in effect, I will tell you about this sword, and there's a couple things to get out of the way before I do. Disclaimers, if you will, things that are important to know before you hear me ramble on about it. One, this review is just my thoughts and opinions, and I claim no expertise in this realm of things. I'm not a great student of history. I'm not going to tell you how historically accurate this is or isn't, because I'm not really qualified to do so, nor how it affects or how it works as a training tool, because I don't study the systems of martial arts that would use this type of sword. But I can show you some video. I can show you ramble about it and tell you my thoughts about it and how it compares to other swords that I've had in my collection, and hopefully that is of some use. One really important thing here, aside from my lack of expertise, is that this is a second-hand sword, and therefore it may not represent what you would expect to get if you were to buy one new from an authorized retailer or from CoA Siberia or from whatever. Anyway, I think it's pretty representative. The guy I got it from didn't seem to use it much, and from my understanding it was bought at Cult of Athena. But anyway, that's what I know about it. It's secondhand, and you should know that before you hear me ramble about it, because there are some blemishes, some imperfections, things like that that may not be, maybe it was a factory second. Maybe any one of those variables could be true. Don't think it is, but I suppose now you know before I ramble. Anyway, this sword, it retails for $460 if you go to the CoA Siberia website, who are the distributors of Kingston Arms, from my understanding. They worked with Atrim. He's the designer, but he didn't manufacture this, so I don't know how that reflects on him exactly. They have a similar relationship with the Tinker line of swords they have, where smart people that know a lot about swords design a sword for them, and they use their manufacturing expertise to try and replicate that several times. Sometimes they do it really well, sometimes they don't. They can be hit or miss. I don't know how well this one adheres to the specification set up by Mr. Trim, but anyway, that's supposedly some of the prestige around it. Anyway, at $460, you can buy the one from the CoA Siberia website, or you can buy one from Cult of Athena or an authorized distributor for around $330. That seems to be where you can find them for. And so that's where I'm going to evaluate and think about, is the sword worth it? Do I like it or not? Is it at a $330 price point? It wouldn't be fair to compare it to the Albions or something like that that cost, $1,000 or more dollars. It wouldn't be fair to compare it to the $160 swords that you can find. There is a museum replica sword that seems to be of a similar type of design. Though there's not this larger crossguard, means that doesn't have something really that I can compare it to from a competing manufacturer. Generally speaking, though, a Type 18 sword is reasonably common, or at least there are shapes similar to it out there. There just doesn't seem to be a lot in the $330 category specifically. Often they're much more expensive, and I would argue probably give you more for that money. They're a little bit more. Dark Side Armory has some 15th century arming swords that are around the $500 or $600 range, but again, at $330, that's this is less than that by a reasonable amount. That said, it's also not fair to compare it to a sword that's $100 or $150. It's twice the price. So I think it finds itself in an interesting little price category where not a ton of things are, and it does have some redeeming things and some cool stuff, and I will attempt to do that. So I'll put descriptions, links to the Cult of Athena website, the information that I have, as well as the measurements I've taken of this sword and put in the Weapon Dynamics computer, and hopefully they help along with my musings and ramblings. So as I often do, soup to nuts, top to bottom. I'm going to start with the kind of the pommel, this end bit down here, and all of the fittings have this kind of rough and tumble look. They have what to my eye almost looks like a large grain of stainless steel or something like that in here, and I'm not going to put this thing really through the paces or beat on it too hard. I've cut with it a little bit, and I'll share the dynamic characteristics later, but I'm not going to put the fittings really through the test. What I will say, though, is aesthetically speaking, I like the look. It almost looks like it was put in some kind of tumbler to give it this rough kind of pinged look on it. And honestly, I do like the way it looks. It has chamfered edges. All of the ledges and sharp bits have been worn away, and I can make out some ledges on here, if you will. There's some spots that are not exactly perfect. There's a bit of a lack of graceful transition, I'll call it, but none of it is harmful to my hand. It doesn't hurt to move around. None of them, if I don't use a glove and just hold the pommel area or let it rub up against the kind of meat of my hand, it doesn't cut into it. All right, so you can probably see that peen area right here. This is something that I don't particularly like to see, and that is a lot of hammer marks around the peen area. I think it could be done more gracefully. I suppose it's a sign of handmadeness, though there's nothing else like this repeated anywhere else in the blade. Everything else kind of has a machined look to it, and so I find this a little off-putting. But it's not bad. It's just a cosmetic thing, and maybe you like it, maybe it doesn't bother you. There's nothing sharp or bad about it. Just there's a lot of hammer marks and roughness to the peen area here, but it's on secure. It doesn't twist, it doesn't move, and you know, just a couple little misplaced hammer marks, if you will. The light might be showing a little bit more detail here in that you can see there's a slightly raised center section here, and it kind of catches in the light. So it does have a little bit more depth and dimension than a simple wheel pommel, though honestly not that much. There's some imperfections in terms of the execution, the hammer marks, the transitions here that I don't like, but at $300 you can't be too picky about these kind of things, and a flawless execution isn't necessarily expected. The root of it, though, I don't expect it to hurt me, and in this I think it's hitting the mark. None of these ledges hurt me, none of them are bad, and I like the aesthetics of it, the pragmatic kind of simple look with a little bit of texture and shape. I think that's really all I'm expecting, and I think it's doing a good job here. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the grip right here, and I like the grip. It's one of my favorite things about this sword is the grip. So a lot of times when I'm looking at swords in the $300 range, if you will, the grip is not as nice as this. Usually it takes a little bit more money to get something that's solid and sturdy and well made, and that's what seems to be what this is right here. It has these kind of cord wrapped look to it. I don't know how exactly it is. Generally speaking, if there's a wood core wrapped in twine, then bound in leather, then blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I don't need to get into it. I don't know what's under here, and I'm not going to break it apart to find out. But aesthetically, it looks really nice. It's not a soft, supple leather, which is usually what I find in these kind of price points around $300. They don't generally come with a kind of nice, kind of lacquered wooden cord grip right here, or it feels awkward, or it's stubby, or it's just not shaped right. The way it hits the transition here, admittedly not so great. Up here around the cross, it's not so bad, but I like this leather wrapping. You can make out a seam right here, but there's no folds or anything that hurts. There's nothing that bunches up or hits my hand. I can feel it. I can feel the seam. It's not exactly hidden or perfect, but it's also not obtrusive. It's not bad, and I like the simple leather wrapped, then cord bound grip here. Oftentimes for this price point, like I said, there's some goofiness that always happens with the grip. It's stitched, or it has flaps of leather on it that are misplaced, or it's just a very supple kind of soft leather and it doesn't have this kind of texture that I prefer, or they're not shapely, and this one is. You can see that it's a little bit more cylindrical towards the base. It swells in the center area of the grip right here, and then it tapers down a little bit. So it's got this nice swell in the middle of your hand. And just honestly, I think the grip, for what it is, it's simple. You know, I'm not trying to tell you it's anything overly spectacular, but for $300, I think it is a nice grip. There's more here than you usually get in the $300 price point, and it's something that I think fits really well in my giant stupid sausage hands. It's very easy to index. It's easy to grab onto. It fits well in bare hands, and I'd imagine you're not going to have too many problems if you're wearing some sort of glove or something like that. Now I'm going to talk about the crossguard here, and it's got this nifty S-shaped crossguard, and it's cool looking. I don't know, there's probably some sort of function to using this thing, which I'm not really too keen on actually doing. To me, it aesthetically looks substantial and large. Oftentimes with these smaller blades, I see a smaller crossguard. So from the aesthetic side of it, it looks a little off-putting. It's not my favorite, but it is unique, and it's big, and it probably serves some kind of function, though I just don't happen to know what it is. In terms of execution of the crossguard, let's start on this side. So you can see the transition seems nice. It doesn't jut out or overlap or have any gunk or anything on it, and it has the same aesthetic look as the pommel does, in that it has this kind of brushed or tumbled looking stainless steel. And if you look really close at it, it looks like it has a large grain structure or something. It does make me wonder how well these would hold up to abuse. I'm not going to find that out in this case, but it does make me wonder how well these would hold up, given that my experience with quillins tends to be they don't always hold up to the punishment perhaps they should. In terms of the crossguard gap, you can see here there's a reasonable sized gap here, and this is an aesthetic thing that I find, rather irksome, but isn't something that you necessarily expect perfection on. Most custom makers, most sword makers out there don't really nail this very small, narrow crossguard gap. It usually has some sort of hole or or area like this. In this case, I don't see it filled in with schmutz and gunk or anything like that, but it's a minor thing. And now I guess if it bothers you, you can see how well it does or doesn't do. In terms of other bits around the crossguard, I would say there's no sharp ledges on it. Obviously, if you thump yourself in the noodle with one of these, it's going to hurt. But none of these hurt my fingers as I try to, if I choke up on the grip or something, none of the ledges are so sharp that it hurts. In terms of a user piece, it's pretty functional and nice. One gripe I would have, though, is the crossguard seems to have a little bit of play to it, which maybe you can hear here. Well, it's probably really easy to hear. So vertically, it doesn't move around, but horizontally, I can get it to move just a little bit. So I don't know if it came that way. I don't know if the other person noticed that it had that issue. I don't think it was from use. It might just be from sitting. Bear in mind, I also live, and I'm not trying to make excuses for this sort here, but I live in an area that has a pretty wide degree of swing in terms of temperature and humidity levels. So I can't say I noticed this when I bought it, but in terms of taking it out, using it a little bit, and preparing for this review, I noticed that it has a little bit of play horizontally. I imagine it could be shimmed. I imagine there's something that could be done given that it doesn't move around vertically, but either way, it's a bit of an irritation. Now I'm going to talk about the scabbard. And so the scabbard is a pretty simple scabbard, but honestly, I have to say I like it for a sword in this price point. If I look at the offerings that come from Windlass, very often they're just leather scabbards, they're not wooden core, which this one is. And in the swords that tend to be around $300, the leather often feels really cheap. Dark Sword Armory, I think, is one of the least expensive brands out there that offers a nice scabbard with nice leather. And this leather isn't quite as nice, but it does seem thick and robust and nicer than what I'm used to finding on swords in this general price point, so to say. The leather itself is stained, and so I would say it does take a stain. And some of these look like stains that were here right at the get-go. Some discoloration from the center off onto the edges. It just doesn't look particularly well stained, so to say. The shape down at the end has two little nails in it, and I like that there's no real significant ledges that catch on anything. It has a similar aesthetic to the rest of the fittings on the sword, but again, it really bothers me when there's giant ledges on here that can catch on stuff. So if you are wearing it at a Renaissance festival or something like that, and you walk into a shop, you're not worried about pulling a table over. I don't know how often people are doing that, but my concern would be actually wearing it and then knocking things over with it. That doesn't seem to be a problem with this. Honestly, I like the scabbard. It has a really nice solid feel to the wooden core. The leather and the stains on it, well, I can't say that that's my favorite feature. It is something that might bother some, but I can't say that I necessarily mind. It has a nice aged kind of rough and tumble look to it. And it matches, I think, aesthetically with the handle. Brown is a color that maybe you do or don't like. I happen to like it, though. And anyway, I think the scabbard is nice. In terms of how it functions as a scabbard, there's a lot of wiggle room inside the scabbard that one might be able to shim up or soften by stuffing something further down in the scabbard if you wanted to. It also just kind of falls out. It doesn't hold particularly tight. Though it could be shimmed. You can see if I just pinch hard here, it doesn't fall out, and as soon as I let go, it does. So I could probably shim it if I wanted more tension. I don't know if that's something you expect to do or what your expectations are from scabbard. I've heard that they shouldn't hold the sword and it should move freely, and I've heard that they should have some tension on them. I'm not exactly sure, but I suppose just this one is pretty free, and it rattles quite a bit, so it doesn't seem to fit particularly well. That said, it seems to be made of good quality leather. It seems pretty thick. It has some staining characteristics, I suppose you might say. But overall, I like the scabbard. I would rather have a solid wood core scabbard with good leather on it that could be shimmed than, cheap, crappy leather around it and a tight scabbard, so to speak. So anyway, I can't say I'm particularly irritated by the scabbard. One additional note, it has some attention. There's another little leather bit on the top here around the mouth of the scabbard. Sometimes these just get left as wood, or they don't get colored, so I appreciate the extra attention here. Also, it's got a leather mouth around the top of it. I can't remember what this piece is called, but if it's metal, it tends to, you can poke it and stuff, and a lot of times they're made of metal. I would prefer to have it made of leather. It seems less likely that I'm going to hurt or harm the sharpness of the sword in taking it out. Worth noting as well that the seam doesn't seem to be stitched or anything like that, but it's glued down pretty secure, and I haven't spotted any loose flaps or anything like that seem to be coming up or bad. All right, now I'm going to talk about the blade, the pointy stabby part. So this is a Type 18 blade. I don't know what makes it a Type 18 blade or how to distinguish it between Type 15 blades or Type 14 blades. Honestly, what it is a kind of tapering to a acute point. It doesn't have a whole lot of distal taper, but it does have some, and I'll put that in the description down below if you're interested in the measurements. It has a prominent central ridge that runs the length all the way to the tip of the blade. In this particular case, the blade seems straight in, it doesn't twist or wind. However, the lines on the blade run around quite a bit. There's a lot of ripples, I suppose I would say, in the surface of the steel. Not so much that it's concerning or anything like that, but there's some machining marks and tool marks that you can see. The edge on the blade is not particularly sharp either, and I'm not going to sharpen it this time. It seems like it has a profile that could take a good edge if I was so inclined to put one on, but I don't really want to. This sword, for me, I'm going to actually sell it when I'm done with this review. I have other swords that are single-handed arming swords, and I'll talk about why I've chosen to keep them over this one towards the end. But that's why I'm not electing to put a sharper edge on it. Didn't come with one that was terribly effective. I'll talk about cutting in a moment as well. But it does look like it could have a sharper edge on it. In terms of steel type, I don't really know what type of steel this is, and I don't often harp on the steel type because I have no way of validating it. I'm not going to here either, but I can tell you about one little odd metallurgical effect in the steel, and that is hopefully my light is picking it up. There is something of a shadow. Come on, light, where are you? Right above the maker's mark, you might be able to see a little shadow right in there. Now, initially I thought that this was maybe some effective polishing compound that had been used. So I took Mother's Mag to the blade just to clean it off after using it and after marking it up and stuff. And this shadow has remained, and it stays on both sides of the blade. You can probably see it here as well. And so what this tells me is that something is a little odd in the heat treat. I don't know if it's bad necessarily. You probably want this part of the blade to be more perhaps more resilient or hardened beyond the base of the blade, where flexibility might be helpful and making it less apt to break perhaps. I don't necessarily know. It's just not something I'm used to seeing in mass-produced swords like this, where now I see that there's a slight shadow here. It doesn't give me a lot of concern in terms of using it. I did hit things with it. I gave it bad strikes and it returned to straight and it held up well. But I did say I noticed the slight difference in the heat treatment. Beyond that, the heat treatment is one thing, or at least this slight shadow here, which I'm speculating is part of the heat treatment. I guess I don't know for sure. It just has some roughness along the sharpened edges. They're not particularly sharp, so I'm not sure what the idea here is in terms of sharpness or how much it should be sharpened or not, but it's not sufficient to do the type of cutting that I'm doing with water bottles and tatami mats and things like that. It would need a keener edge. If you're bashing it in armor, perhaps this is good, but if you're not, then I don't know that this is a terribly effective edge. The center line is prominent on it, but again, lots of surface ripples and things like that in it. I don't know what you're exactly expecting for this amount of money, but for me, this is about on par. The line doesn't waver, it's straight in the handle, and the sharpness, just about everyone comes with a sword that isn't sharp enough out of the box. They all tend to have a rough edge that, if you want to do tatami competition cutting, requires some extra effort on your part to get to the level of keenness you want. One other bit to note is that there are some blemishes on here from cutting. The polish does show them. The polish is like a satin polish, and it is acceptable. I don't necessarily mind it. It's not the same kind of 600 grit polish, but it does have a satiny look to it, and I imagine it's easy to clean up if that's your thing and you have the Scotch-Brite pads or something to do it. Anyway, it doesn't bother me, and I'm not expecting it, though it is worth noting that other swords from Windlass tend to be a little buffier than this. Some of the less expensive ones are shinier. If that polish level on the surface of the steel is important to you, then I suppose there you go. In terms of dynamic characteristics, I suppose that's the other thing I really like about this sword. Oftentimes, these little one-handed arming swords surprise me in how stout and rough they are in the hands. They often feel not as nimble as I would like them to, and this one has dynamic characteristics that lend it to feeling very compact and nimble in the hand. It's a comfortable little sword to move around. I can't necessarily get a ton of authority in the cut, but a lot of that is influenced by this edge here. Again, I'm not electing to sharpen it. I did cut with it. It didn't cut particularly well. No surprise. It's, I wouldn't want to press too hard. It's sharp-ish, but, not so sharp that I can't run my fingers on it a bit. And it needs to be sharper than that to successfully cut tatami. not necessarily to cut a person, but to cleave through tatami, it definitely does. So I didn't have a whole lot of luck cutting, but I would say in terms of point control, I feel like I can rotate it around, I can move this around to get it the pointy bit where I want. In terms of cutting, it's a fast and agile little sword, and I really like the way it handles. Oftentimes that's where other swords in this price category tend to miss. If I look at the bottom rung of swords available on the market that tend to be arming swords, they're often overbuilt and they don't lend themselves to being agile, fun, to move around swords, and this one does. So if you're not bothered by having to sharpen it up, though, if you are bothered by sharpening it, know that just about everyone misses on the sharpening. You can have yourself a nice lively sword, and that dynamically is one thing that I really do like about this sword, is how it's balanced, how it moves. It's very comfortable in the hand. Cutting did not go great, as I noted. I didn't successfully cut many things without really putting a lot of chutzpah behind it. It can cut, and I imagine, again, it would do much better if I just put a better edge on it. I don't want to, because I'll probably mess it up, and that will make it harder to sell. So why am I going to keep a different sword and sell this one? Well, it's purely an aesthetic thing and not something that you should really take into consideration. This sword is handsome, at least I think it is, and maybe you like it more or less than me, I'm not sure, but basically I don't study sword and buckler, and if I were to study sword and buckler, then this might be a tool worth keeping. I like the agility. If I were to study the martial systems that move this around, then I would probably appreciate this as a tool more than I would the one I'm choosing to keep, which is the Albion Sovereign. I have a Type 14 sword up behind me, and I like the way that one looks, and I don't need a lot of single-handed arming swords around me, and I just happen to really think that that one looks good. So I'm going to sell this one and keep that one, and that's really the only reason, which isn't probably very helpful to you if you're looking for a training tool, if you're looking for something aesthetically speaking, and yada yada yada. But basically comparing a $1,200 sword of a different type doesn't necessarily help you. But that's my reason for selling this one and keeping the other, is purely an aesthetic thing based on my needs as a practitioner, as a collector, just because that's what I want to do, which isn't necessarily a particularly good reason, or at least not helpful for you to make a decision. But hopefully the rest of the stuff in this video has provided you with some information to make a good decision on if this sword is worth it for you or not. I'll put links to Cult of Athena in the description down below if you so choose to buy one. That seems to be a good place to get one. Anyway, that's all I've got. As always, cheers, and thanks for watching.